Hey everyone, my name is Alice and I am a non-binary transgender woman. I think that the word transgender means a lot of different things to different people. So I want to talk about what that means to me and what my experience as a trans person has been. To me, being non-binary means that I don't really fit into a stereotypical gender role. My identity and gender, it's very fluid in terms of how I present socially and what role I take on in a traditional sense. I don't like labels, and I don't like people making assumptions about me based off of the way I look, my genitals, how I dress, or, even my pronouns. Right now, my pronouns are she, they. To me, being a transgender woman primarily means that I have a desire and a medical need to be on HRT, or hormone replacement therapy. I consider myself a woman in the sense that the body that I'm most comfortable in is one which is traditionally associated with that label. But beyond that, words and labels are just not too important to me. I grew up in a small suburban town in New Jersey. I went to Catholic school, which was in many ways a very unfriendly place for queer people. There were a small handful of gay people at my school, and they stood out quite dramatically. There were no trans people and no mention of them. I didn't really know what a trans person was growing up, other than occasional complaints from family members about people changing their pronouns and damaging their bodies. The closest thing I had to media representation of a trans person growing up was the serial killer lunatic from Silence of the Lambs who wants to make a coat out of women's skin. For most of my life, I had the idea in my head that I would rather have been a woman. Due to a lack of media representation and education, I overlooked this, writing it off as simply an intrusive thought. As I became more and more educated, this became harder to do. The desire to tell friends I was trans started popping up late at night around the end of my freshman year. I didn't understand what this meant exactly at the time, but something inside me had a deep, fundamental awareness and a desire to share this thing. I still didn't, though, and every morning when I woke up, I would just, force myself to forget that happened and pretend it didn't exist. When I went home for the summer, I was able to push that thought out of my mind by working grueling and long hours at a dining chain. The first semester of my second year of college started out deceptively positive, but I began to slip into what can only really be described as madness. I was hardly sleeping, and when I did, I would have vivid nightmares, including sleep paralysis. I didn't eat much, but I consumed a lot of energy drinks. I was pissed off at the world, depressed, and anxious. I started feeding into conspiracy theory-esque thoughts, and I spent long hours writing panic-driven paragraphs in notebooks. I knew that there was something in me that was hidden, some fundamental kernel of truth that was at the center of all this, but I was unwilling to acknowledge or accept that this was my identity in being trans. The decline of my well-being, as well as my questioning of gender, shows very well in my drawings from the time. I essentially got more and more unstable, erratic, and irrational until I was finally forced to confront my identity and who I am. When I finally did this, I came out to myself and to the world, changing my name to Alice. This was incredibly relieving. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt this grip of insanity finally melting away. However, despite the massive improvements to my mental health, publicly coming out as a transgender woman introduced a slew of problems into my life that I was completely unprepared to deal with. Coming out provided new challenges both at a personal and a social level. Acknowledging my dysphoria helped in many ways, but it also made the dysphoria worse. Now I knew what I was actually feeling, and for the first time I could understand how uncomfortable I was in my body. Gaining an understanding of why mirrors and taking my clothes off always made me uncomfortable was great, but it also intensified the uncomfortability of these things because I could no longer just write it off as some regular old insecurity. Many days in those early months, I would be completely unable to get out of bed simply because I would not want to exist in my body. I still struggle with that some days, but it is getting better. I also struggled very severely with internalized misogyny and transphobia. The way I had been raised taught me certain fundamental subconscious biases about both women and trans people, and suddenly being a part of both of those groups was an incredibly large change, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I've definitely come a very long way in regards to these internal biases, but I still have a long way to go. On top of this, the social ramifications of coming out were devastating. A lot of people I considered good friends simply stopped acknowledging my existence, and it also drove me further away from already complicated and difficult family issues. I also started getting dirty looks and laughter in public. Existing in the world as a trans person, especially a trans woman, has penetrated every facet of my social existence. There's a new tension every time I tell someone my name, and every time I meet a new person, there's a high likelihood that they will inherently dislike or mistrust me simply based on my identity. There's also a lot of people who aren't necessarily transphobic, but are still made uncomfortable of me just because I break so harshly from established culture and societal norms. I find that there's often this nervousness and tension when people speak to me, and I've had people tell me that they're afraid that I will cancel them before. There's also a lot of people who treat me with pity, like I'm some sort of sick and diseased individual. Despite the challenges and difficulties that coming out provided, I would not go back for anything, and I do not regret accepting my identity. There are so many things that I am grateful for about this existence. I'm incredibly grateful for the difficulties that I've faced as a result of being trans. Despite the hardship and obstacles, it has shown me aspects of reality and existence that I simply would not have understood or even known about due to my position of privilege as a result of being perceived as a cis white male. It's always been my philosophy to love and respect all people, regardless of belief, but being subjected to actual discrimination as a result of who I am really challenged that belief. I appreciate the challenge, though. I appreciate having my beliefs and my convictions questioned, and I feel like the difficulty of this situation has shown me a strength and a resilience that I just otherwise would never have discovered about myself. There is an astonishing level of relief I felt to finally accept myself. For the majority of life, I was deeply unhappy, and I simply assumed that this was the only way that I could exist, was deeply depressed and unhappy. Coming out showed me that this was incorrect, and that I am actually capable of being happy. There were even physical signs of relief. I always had bad acne, but a few weeks after coming out, it had gotten better than it ever had been before. And while it, still is here, obviously, it was just super relieving and affirming to have a physical sign of relief at this mental weight off my chest. I've also been able to start taking care of my physical and mental well-being. Before coming out, I just had no interest in doing this. I was living a life with an identity that was created for me by society and other people, and I had no interest in taking care of that person, and in fact, I quite disliked them. I was at war with myself for so long and spent so long hating myself, but since coming out, I've finally been able to start learning to love myself. It's an incredibly hard thing to do, and I still struggle with it pretty significantly, but I'm really grateful to be able to be on the path that I'm on. Coming out as trans, as a woman, has saved my life, and it has freed me from the shackles of social perception that chained me for so long. So yeah, I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that it maybe gave you a little more clarity on, what it means to be trans, what a trans person looks like, and, ultimately I hope that you enjoyed hearing my story and my experience, and I hope that this can help people sort of start to remove the stigma that exists around people like me, and maybe help other people open up to their identities as well. So yeah, thanks so much for your time, and I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.